All right, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Michael Svetlik. I'm the Vice President of Programs here at IFES, and I want to start by welcoming you to our organization. We're very pleased to be hosting today's event, Dirty Money in Politics, How El Padrino's Contributions Affect Security in Latin America. On the table, as you entered, on the table there was several information sheets and some publications, and I invite you to take advantage of those. IFES has a long history in working in Latin America to support accountable political, democratic political systems, electoral systems, and work in anti-fraud and transparency. And some of the publications, one in particular that we're very proud of is a first in a white paper series on anti-fraud measures in elections by Rafael Lopez Pintor, someone who's been associated with our organization for a very long time. And I also want to point out, not on the table, but available on our website at www.ifes.org, as a publication that we've done with funding from the United Nations Development Fund on political finance regulation, the global experience, which also touches upon issues salient to Latin America. Before we begin with our two presenters, I wanted to briefly introduce them, but only briefly because you do have information about their, more extended information about their bios. To my left is Douglas Farah. He's a senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center. He's served for acted several years as security analyst in various capacities and has a long and distinguished career as a journalist working with the Washington Post in particular on a number of important assignments both in Latin America as well as Europe and West Africa. More information is available on his writings. His current writings is available in this information sheet outside. To Douglas's left is Delia Ferreira. Delia is a member of the board of advisors of Transparency International. She's a native of Argentina and has worked for many years as an advisor to representatives in the National Congress as well as with the National Accounting Office. She has worked with IFES in a number of instances. We'll speak today on her experience in promoting more accountable political finance regimes in Latin America. I should say she's also worked with a number of other organizations, including the OAS, IDEA, International IDEA, and CAPEL, just to name a few. We are very pleased to have this event today to contribute to the larger dialogue regarding security and accountability of governance in Latin America. For IFES, we have been involved in a number of country projects that have touched upon issues of security around the election process. We've also been very much involved, as I mentioned, in terms of supporting more accountable and transparent regimes of political finance. And this is a extremely, I think, timely topic to address today, given the key elections, especially in Central America, over the next few years. And I think both speakers will be addressing what to look for, what we have in store for us. So without more, I'll turn it over to our speakers. After they make prepared remarks, we will then have what we hope will be a lively Q&A and discussion session, something that we always make a part of these events and hope that everyone will get great benefit from. But first, Douglas, I'll give you the floor.
Michael, thank you very much for that introduction, and thanks to IFES for hosting this event. I didn't bring my watch. If I get going too long, just let me know, okay? Oh, there you go. Thank you. Lovely. As Michael said, I think we're facing a really interesting and crucial time in Latin America, and the model of corruption or narco-corruption in the campaigns is not something new, but I think we're seeing changing types of models as we look at what's happening across the region. And I think it's in some ways now much more difficult to get at, so much more diffuse, much more intangible or difficult to identify, partly because it's not quite as obvious and not quite as blatant as it has been in the past. I want to talk a little bit about the different models that I've observed. I spent a lot of time in Colombia in the 1980s, 1990s, through the mid part of to the early 2000s, and I go back regularly now, and I spent many years in in Central America covering the wars there, particularly in the 80s, and then also again into the 90s, and I regularly go down there now too. And I think one of the things, if you know Colombian history, they essentially, along with, I think similar to the PRI, although the PRI in Mexico as not my area of expertise, you had a very top-down model of narco-corruption. You had people, you started out with Pablo Escobar, the original Padrino, in this circumstance, who wanted initially to be president. He wanted to take over the government. That was his ambition. He didn't succeed. He killed a lot of people along the way, including some of the best and the brightest of Colombia's presidential candidates and law enforcement and attorney generals, etc. And the Cali cartel, which sort of succeeded him, but also while he was there, it developed a much more effective model, and that you saw with the fruit of the election of Ernesto Samper in 1994. The Cali cartel simply decided to buy its way into power. They wanted a power for themselves, but they also wanted the guarantee of complete impunity for their activities. And so you see them put several $1 million into the Samper campaign. It became a huge event at the time, discussed back and forth. It ended up with sufficient evidence that the Cali cartel had put more than $3 million into his campaign for him to lose his U.S. visa and become essentially an international pariah at that state. It had passed through his campaign manager, who was then named defense minister, who was then arrested. There were all kinds of colorful and creative characters running around. But in the end, it was a very clear attempt to buy the government so that then they wouldn't have to worry about anything else further down the line. You see something a little bit similar. You can debate the degree of success with the election of Rafael Correa in Ecuador, where there's now significant evidence that the FARC put several $100,000 into his campaign. He says that it never got there. There's significant evidence that it did. The question is, did he know? What did he know, and when did he know it? And if you look at the inner circle that received the money, it was very close to him, if not him himself, and from the Ostaiza brothers, too, who are also very significant drug traffickers in the Ecuadorian structure, very closely linked to the FARC. You see them, and if you read the documents captured from Raul Reyes in the Langostura bombing of March 1st, 2008, the FARC had a clear strategy in doing what they wanted to do, what they thought they were doing. Whether it was successful or not I think is still an open question. They wanted the border freed up. So they offer in specific instances to finance the campaign in exchange for specific things that only the national government could do for them. They wanted the pressure on the border eased. They wanted to be able to keep their camps there more permanently, and they wanted to, and they offered, and there's significant evidence, in fact, that they did enlist or enroll many Colombians into the Ecuadorian electoral process to vote with instructions to vote for Correa, people they sent across the border from Colombia. But it wasn't a haphazard, let's fund whoever, somebody to be nice guys. It was with a specific purpose. And Correa was certainly not the only one. Lucio Gutierrez before, they also write about their funding of his campaign earlier. And then certainly before that, you had many other instances of lesser size, but of narco infiltration. And then you see, I think, and that's a model I think that has become difficult to sustain because of the international pressure. You do have the one significant outstanding problem in Latin America right now in Suriname, where you have Desi Bouterse, a convicted cocaine trafficker, just reelected president after having run a coup and become president a couple decades ago, now back in with his conviction in absentia in Holland still on the books, and his ongoing involvement, or suspected ongoing involvement of that, certainly through 2008, well documented in the WikiLeaks cables that the U.S. was putting out. So you do have this phenomenon of narcotizando, or narcoticizing the upper echelons of governments, and going into an election campaign with the idea that you want a specific candidate to win at the senior levels because it will benefit you in multiple ways. But what you see now, I think, particularly in Mexico and Central America, is a changing model, and that's much more the bottom-up model of corruption. Instead of looking at taking over an entire, the government from the top down, from the presidency on down, The drug trafficking organizations, if you look at them in El Salvador and Guatemala particularly, which I'm most familiar with, Petén particularly with the recent massacre of the 27 folks up there, the cartels, as the Mexicans push south and the Central American groups negotiate with them and the Colombians try to figure out how to fit in, are particularly interested in the plazas. They want places where they can move their drugs through with impunity. They're not too worried about the macro political structure. They want to be able to do what they need to do in a very particular area. And yes, the Zetas are pushing down. Sinaloa is very active in Honduras, but much of the on-the-ground transportation, where the drugs arrive, happens at a local level with local groups in charge that then respond and move the products. And it's certainly not just drugs. You also get a high level of illegal or human trafficking, weapons trafficking, bulk cash movements, and all those sort of things fit into the same general pipelines. So you see people now interested in controlling their space, and that means that you go, instead of for the president, you go for the mayor. You go for maybe the governor of the province if you have to, but you really want to go for the local police chief and the local mayor and whoever else wields specific influence like in that particular area. You see this with Los Perrones in El Salvador, in San Miguel and the eastern region. You saw a specific group of drug traffickers take over a route. Why? Because the drugs were coming in from on the Pacific coast. They needed a place to land. San Miguel is right on the litoral, they're on the sea coast. And then they needed to move the products across the coastal highway up, then into Guatemala. And so you had a big fight in that area and a lot of violence surrounding the Plaza of San Miguel and the beaches of San Miguel, not for the Funes government and not for the Ministro de Gobernación, any of those high places. And it became quite evident that senior people in multiple political parties, it wasn't a one-party phenomenon, were allowing this to happen and receiving economic benefit in return for it. And so if you look at the upcoming elections and how things have evolved, you see a whole host of new activities in that area and an economic boom that is inexplicable in normal economic terms. There's nothing new going on there, and yet there is a vast amount more money, and the candidacies are much more heated in this particular time. And the other example you see very clearly, I think, in El Salvador is traditionally, or under Salvadoran law, to maintain your place on the ballot, you had to receive 5% of the vote. If you didn't receive 5%, then you were removed from the ballot. You have two minority parties, the PCN, the Partido Conciliación Nacional, and the Christian Democrats, who control they're very strong only in a few small towns, and most of them in the Santa Ana region bordering, going up toward the Guatemalan border. Neither one of them made their 5%. And so the assembly, after a series of unusual events, shall we say, lowered the threshold of the need to maintain your party inscription to 3%. And suddenly, miraculously, the PCN and the PDC could maintain their mayors and their party structures, even though they're relevant only in certain specific corridors where not only, but where primarily illicit traffic passes through. So I think if you look toward what's coming, and those are much harder to identify in many ways, because you don't have one big hit at the top where that destabilizes the entire country or makes everybody go, oh man, Ernesto Samper is a drug trafficker or took money from the Cali cartel, which was what everybody knew. Now it's much more dispersed and diffused and much harder to get a handle on. And because, as we're seeing in Guatemala, there are very few requirements for reporting into campaign finance. You don't have to, they have a limit on what they can spend, but but the reporting on whether they pass the limit or not is not done until after the campaign is over. They weren't supposed to start campaigning until May 1st, and then they began, but they were campaigning months before, and Transparency and others have already documented how much some of what they spent in the preceding months, which was into the millions of dollars. That is essentially illegal, but there's no sanction in place to say you can't. Or if there is a sanction, it's a fine of a couple $100s. So it's really, if you're going to spend $1 million, spending another $200 for a small fine is not going to set you back a whole lot. And then you see the other thing you see is the hybrid model, where you have both. And this is most visible, I think, in Colombia, where you have If you looked at a couple of years ago, in the middle of the Uribe government, you had about a third of the Colombian Congress facing criminal charges, either for human rights abuses financed by the autodefensas, by the self-defense paramilitary groups, and to a lesser degree in the formal political structure, in that case, the FARC. And so you had a huge segment of the political class which had worked its way up into office by if not working with the narcos and the paramilitary groups, certainly tolerating them, taking their money, and being pushed forward by these groups, suddenly sitting in the Congress in huge numbers. And what you saw was the inability, the freezing of the government's ability to do multiple things. And it went very close to President Uribe. His primo hermano, his first cousin, was also put in jail out of the Congress, and there was a whole series of events there. But this was a sort of a hybrid model of armed groups deeply involved in drug trafficking, wanting both national protection and local protection. They wanted to they wanted their plazas, they wanted their military control, and for that military control they needed the acquiescence of the military, which implied significant political protection. And so they bought their way into the structure for hundreds of millions of dollars, and suddenly, and it was bit by bit, people sort of knew it, people began to think about it, and suddenly the investigations into the Narco Congreso became a huge deal, and it was like, holy cow, half of our Congress is fully narcoticized. And that's, I think, an unusual circumstance. You'll probably mostly see when there is an armed conflict in conjunction with drug trafficking, as Colombia had with both the FARC and the paramilitares, fighting essentially a narcotics war, but with an ideological veneer and wanting to buy into the political system. So I think if we look at how things are going to be playing out in these elections, and I think we're going to hear more about this in detail, I think we need to focus on the ability to account for where the money comes from, which very few countries do well in the region, and certainly Guatemala is wrestling with this now. They have a Tribunal Supremo that doesn't have the teeth and the ability to do what it needs to do, even if they wanted to, if they had the will to do it. And you also need to focus on the local races. That is where I think, and you see this in Mexico coming up too, you're not going to see a full court press by the narcos in the presidential campaigns. I don't think. Yeah. This is my opinion. They'll be there. They'll be presence. They'll make themselves known. But the real fight will be over specific alcaldías. And if you talk to people who know the drug trafficking world there well, which I was just doing a couple weeks ago, they can give you the list of the towns that are going to be the most peleados, the most hard-fought in this electoral campaign, because you'll have the Zetas, Sinaloa, and the local groups all competing for that particular space to pass through. And they all have to do with geographic location, not broader political transcendence. They're not the most politically or economically viable regions in the country. They're the regions that these groups need for their own reasons to control, and that's where they're going to be putting a significant amount of money. And I'll leave it there and be glad to go from there.
Thank you, Douglas, for that sobering analysis of the problems that we face. We turn now to Delia Ferreira, who will approach it from more like a practitioner's perspective in terms of detection and prevention of dirty money in politics and the efforts that are being made to prevent the type of infiltration that Douglas was describing from a historical and current perspective. Delia.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, all of you, for coming. And after this brilliant exposition by Douglas, I would start by asking, why are we talking here about dirty money? And it's not just out of curiosity or the aim of discovering crimes or some detective activity. We are discussing this because what is at stake here is the quality of democracy, the quality of the democratic process as a whole, the capture of state. What is at stake here is the representative relationship. Are representatives of the people, as the theory goes, or are they the employees of the narco boss or any organized crime lord in the region? That's the question that is here under this discussion. And also, good governance. Are public policies decided or oriented to the welfare of the whole community? Are they the response to campaign favors, and they are only oriented to benefit those cartels, those organized crime associations. That is what we are discussing now. I completely agree with Douglas about the shift in the model. Any mafia organization, that is to say, organized crime is not just crime. It means organization, it means institutionalization within the illicit work of the group. And any mafia organization needs and is based on territorial domain. They need territory. If you don't have the domain of a territory, you are not talking about a mafia. Territory is a key factor. That's why they have changed the strategy in Latin America and in other countries. Instead of financing presidential campaigns, they are now working at the local level elections. And that's really a challenge for the ones that are fighting for transparency in campaign finance, because it's very much difficult to control the financing of local campaigns than the financing of presidential campaigns. Even worse in federal countries, where the national authority may not have the competence or the authority, the capacity to go and audit local campaigns. So the decentralization, the lower level of local campaigns exposure in national press helps these guys to disguise, to hide the campaign financing origin. So that's one of the challenges. It's less visible, it's low profile, and it's very difficult to control. The second challenge has to do with the compensation expected by these groups. And this is important for the sake of awareness, for the sake of journalist investigations. When a company gives money to a campaign, the expected results are to get contracts, licenses, benefits, privileges in some way, opportunities, access to the elected officials. When organized crime or illicit business gives money to a campaign, the expected compensation is no action, is ineffectiveness, is inefficiency, is no reaction on the part of the government, local, provincial, or national. The expected result is don't do anything, because what I need is protection, to work comfortably without any reaction on the part of the authorities. And this is much easier to disguise in front of the people. Because if you give a contract to a company, you have to explain why did you do so, because the company is working, everybody's seeing the logos and the trucks and everything. When you are ineffective in fighting criminal organizations, your response may be, as an elected official, I lack resources. I don't have enough resources to fight to these guys who are very powerful, have lots of money, lots of contacts, etc. Or, yes, this is very worrying a problem, but we have to prioritize. And I'm devoted completely my period to health or education or to fighting poverty. So I don't have money to fight these guys. Or, for instance, I don't have money to buy the radars to control space traffic. Or I have bought the radar, but I don't have the employees to control all the radars. So, as in some countries in the region, from 10 to 11, the radar that is working is the one in the northeast, and from 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 8 o'clock in the afternoon, the radar is stopped and the other one is working, and that is officially made public in order to everybody know that we are controlling our frontiers from this hour to this hour, from this hour to this hour. So, because I don't have enough employees to do this. So it's much easier to justify the expected compensation in these cases than in the other ones. And the third challenge has to do with the traditional regulatory response. We will prohibit this kind of financing. We will write and pass a very wonderful written law saying that it is prohibited or it's illegal to receive money from organized crime. Wonderful. Perfect. Now, imagine the situation. You have the law. You have a very efficient and independent electoral body. You have good sanctions, not the ones that Douglas described. Then you are asked by the CEO of a company, Delia, you are an expert on this. Can I give money to a campaign? My answer